Today, we're going to explore the swamp. Swamp thing, draining technical debt. I want to talk about the swamp, define it, talk about what technical debt is, the way I want to see it, and then basically walk you through a show and tell of what I do as a manager to try to use JIRA to correctly order all the chaos that's surrounding my software teams that work for me. So before we get started, I just want to do a quick poll. How many of you folks are actually involved in the back end of dealing with JIRA at the server level and administering it and so on? Let's just see a show of hands, okay? How many of you are busy filling it full of content? Your test documenters, your software engineers, and so forth, okay? How many of you are in the position of trying to look into JIRA and then sort of order the chaos so that you can have teams behave and perform better? Okay, good. So we're pretty evenly split. I'm in this third category. I don't have any magic conclusions for you. There's basically two takeaways that I want to leave you with. And as I go through my talk, I want to tell them to you now so you can decide whether I've tried to achieve this. First of all, people will invest in decisions that stick. And for today, I'm talking about personal investment. They'll invest their time. They'll commit their energy. They will stick to the decisions they make with you as a group later on. And that's what I'm essentially trying to do through the workflow that I'm managing. The other one is that we use JIRA, and that's why I'm here. JIRA and a few simple techniques, and that's what I'll walk through. I'll just show you what I do, and you can be the judge of it, allows our team to do this on what I'm calling an industrial scale. So when I say industrial scale, I have a software team that's raising somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 20,000 JIRA issues or items a year. I have to not look at every one of them as the project engineer, but I'm certainly there at the junction between the constraints, how much budget we've got, how much time we've got, and all the competing desires and defects and things that we got to get to. And I got to work with people, some of whom who work for me, who I can direct, others who don't work for me, but I have to coerce or to charm into laying down their decisions and letting us move forward. Well, first, I want to welcome you to the swamp. And the swamp is a simple concept for us. The swamp is full of big things, small things, logs, sticks, twigs, leaves, all these things. They're change requests, they're defects in the system, they're new features. And the challenge we have is to how to order these in a way that actually manages it so that things can unfold in a timely and happy way. We can meet deliveries, we don't work teams to death. Teams can seem like they're actually getting somewhere instead of mismanaging them and ending up with a lot of bright developers, test engineers, requirements authors who just aren't able to gel. Now, I work for MDA. I'll just spend just a moment describing the kind of work we do. MDA is a fairly old company from a tech perspective, certainly compared to the folks around here today and some of the presentations I've seen. We were founded in the late 1960s. So really, by software perspective, we're ancient. And the way you get ancient in any business is through what I'm calling flexible specialization. I've been with this company for over 15 years. And again, in the tech business, that's kind of a liability. If you've been with one firm for 15 years, you start to look like, what's the damage, right? The reason I'm still there is that I've worked in naval trainers, I've worked in insurance claim systems, I've worked in currently aviation systems. And one thing that I've always been drawn to is essentially the burning building or the burning outhouse, the project that's in trouble. And that seems to be where my career has always kind of gravitated to. And so, for instance, in the insurance business, when I showed up from head office to try to help the team get through the deliveries, I was the devil. I was the guy who'd come down from Canada and was now going to go and rearrange everyone's workflow and adjust things. But what I found in that instance, and what I find in other instances, is really fundamentally poor change control is fuel. So if you've got a set of developers or a team or an organization that's not functioning correctly, some of the best things to go after, like if you're fighting a fire, is you don't spray the fire extinguisher at the flames, you spray it at the burning log. And when you do that, you put out the fire. This is what we're talking about today, change control. So the change control boards, they have different terms for them. I call them change control boards. It is really kind of the ugly duckling of engineering process. People don't like going to them. They can be very overbearing in terms of the amount of time you got to spend in them. You can find that it's really difficult to assemble the right quorum, get the right people together so that the decisions stick. The process I'm going to talk about is not something I've patented or copyrighted or I'm selling or anything. It's just what I do and what our team does. And what it's really trying to deal with as well is the fact that all the way through our development effort, we're incurring technical debt. And my perspective on technical debt, like all debt, is that sometimes it is good until the point when it becomes bad. What I mean is that I have to deliver systems, and my team has to get things out the door. We can't build architectures that anticipate all potential situations or can scale fully. We don't have the money the first time around. So in a way, we borrow, and we create a series of defects that will be there in the future when we have to go and make our system bigger, when we have to meet more users, when our system has to do more calculations. The key of the tool set, of course, is JIRA in the middle. I happen to also use email and Outlook as part of this very simple kind of homegrown process. I'm not presenting this as the final iteration. It's something that's just sort of evolved, and I could see, even being at this conference, the kind of tools that are available now could allow me to retire some of these surrounding systems that I've bolted essentially onto the outside of JIRA. Outlook is what our company uses for email, so I use it too. On a different project, it could be a different email client. I don't care. Core is JIRA, and then Excel on the right, or anything that allows you to sort of tabularize and auto-filter and pivot table and do all those sort of classic spreadsheet activities. So those are the 3 items. Now, this is where we kind of get into the show and tell. And I'm going to slow the presentation down a little bit here. It's a screenshot. Some of you in the back may not be able to see all the detail. That's not going to be important, because I'm essentially going to walk through the key items. I'm going to show you 3 screenshots in succession here, talk about some of the concepts about why I'm using these particular views, go through that theory, and then come back and walk through them in detail. And that will essentially be the workflow, a day in the life of when I'm running a change control board. Here I'm using filters to go and look at all the change requests that we've been building up in our system. And a change request is just a neutral way of saying bug, saying new requirement, saying anything we want to do that's going to impact what we have in Subversion. Essentially, it's going to require a commit. I have in there the key. For those of you in the back, that the summary is here in the middle. I've obscured them a little bit just because this will probably all be on the internet, and the internet is forever, so my apologies. And also, don't worry, they're not like really bad bugs. They're just bugs. This is the list of things that we would take into our CCB, our change control boards, which is a time and place and a set of people. I mentioned Excel a few slides back. I find it really useful to go and do the export feature, get out into Excel early, go and cull that list in special ways, which I could potentially do in JIRA. We run on 4.3, and I found that just being able to escape into Excel lets me move quicker and get to something, a grid, that I then can go and paste into meeting invites, which is where the rubber's really going to hit the road. And one of the themes, certainly in our workplace, is that we send a lot of email. And the long email thread that discusses a particular issue, say the first one on the row there, issue 12.5.16. It makes me sad when I see a long email thread with people correctly, carefully, grammatically typing out responses back and forth, when sometimes those same email threads could just be 2 people meeting, or 3 people, or 4 people meeting for about 3 or 4 minutes. Because we have large teams, the kind of work that we do, we get really sensitive about what's wasting time. Because if we're wasting 10 minutes a day for each developer, that 10 minutes, even if it's just one person, turns into a week of their life at the end of the year. A week of the life is something you can dollarize. So the bean counters, we can dollarize that. On the other hand, it's a week of schedule. And so we're always striving to do things that have low administrivia. Low administrivia where I'm able to get a quorum together really quickly based on what we have inside JIRA, and then proceed with the actual meeting. The other is this idea of stickiness. I've found that if you can basically come up with a system where you can get ideas, and this is the swamp, the big idea, the small idea, the little thing, and you increase the participation, then what you end up with is the stickiness allows you to have better participation. And again, this is participation of people who answer to me, who I need to influence and motivate and direct, but also a lot of people who don't answer to me. A systems engineer, for instance, who reports into a program office. That program office is having to deal with requirements. I can only influence them, but I need them to come in and stick by the decisions that they make with me. And the last thing is that we like to try to create an environment where we have long trains of thought. You know, at our office, the cubicle versus office debate will flare up from time to time. We work in offices, literally long hallways where people can shut the door. 2 people to an office, maybe. My office is about 8 foot by 8 foot. I can shut the door, I can open the door. My team leads will all sit together in the same office, or sorry, the same hallway, and face each other, or be near each other. But they can shut the door. They can also listen to the chatter that's coming from different team leads who may be coming, or other team members. But the problems that my teams tend to have to solve are very algorithmically intense, very mathematically intense. And I, for instance, I can't do homework while listening to the TV. I can't do work while listening to music with lyrics. So a lot of what we do is we try to create this environment that's somewhat quiet, somewhat monastic, until someone has a meeting. And then we pile into people's offices. If it's too loud, you can shut your door out of courtesy. You can leave the door open. People up and down the hallway can leave it open if they want to eavesdrop. If the issue that they've dealt with is now being talked about, they can shut the door again. So that's the theory, and this is us trying to do the practice. We have, inside JIRA, created a workflow. I say the change request is what we primarily bring into these review meetings. And there are some key fields that we use. And again, for the folks at the back, I'll go through it in more detail right now. So when we go and create an issue, of course, there's a summary. The summary is a description of the problem. Being a large software engineering firm, we put a lot of emphasis on naming conventions and structure, and so we do the same thing in the summary. And in fact, I was talking to people here at some of the sessions at the conference, the dilemma of like when to add a new field or when to have a convention by having using text inside the summary, like keywords and so forth, is a dilemma. We tend to do things to add new fields or adjust our fields very incrementally, because we don't want to have a form like an CR form that explodes into a lot of independent fields. So one thing we'll do in the summary is if it's a particular subsystem and it's not appropriate yet to attach it to a component, we'll just put that right in the summary. And because these come through the change control board, we eyeball them all. The other is severity. That's the second one down the list. Severity, the goal there is to have an objective statement that really doesn't attract much debate about how bad the problem is. So for instance, if it's a crash that causes a critical loss of data or just stops the system from even standing up, that's critical. And the severity is important because by having a set of rules that essentially govern what you set it to, there's a lot less debate. The other would be high. High example would be it fails the requirement or gives wrong numbers. A lot of our end users are expert end users. They're not sort of typically folks in the public who'd be patient about maybe it's sometimes kind of right and maybe not. They want to see exactitude in the numbers that come out of our system. The other one is, say, medium. You know, its workflow is a bit awkward, maybe misleading to the user. The last one is low. It could be a typo. But once we've set the severity, the next thing we're interested in, if I skip down a little bit, it's called priority order. And that's where the CCB is really adding value and the change control that we're doing. So for instance, we may have a typo, which is low severity, but it's on our splash screen, and the customer's going to see it every day. So up it goes in the priority order. Now, for those of you who've been tasked with putting in new fields or adjusting the workflow, when we chose to do priority order, rather than having sort of an unbounded integer, we were thinking already ahead to what we wanted to see in the dashboards. Because that tends to be how we work at our firm. Is we work from what we want to see in the dashboard, and we work backwards to the kind of information we want people to populate inside our forms. So it's just a very practical example. The priority order comes in 12 flavors. 12 flavors. And those 12 flavors allowed us to put it into the 2x2 grid. You folks, how many of you are using dashboards on a regular basis inside your JIRA world? Okay. I mean, the dashboard for me, and I'm speaking as a manager, so I'm biased, is really the killer app inside JIRA. The ability to configure those dashboards, share those dashboards. So we wanted to see a 2x2 grid that showed the state of an issue, whether it was open, assigned, in progress, and so forth, against its severity. And just in a very simple way, you can watch the defect set inside your project kind of wash through from being a whole bunch of critical opens and sort of start to sort themselves out by getting in progress and resolved, down to being a set of assigned low priority issues. So it's a very kind of visceral way to watch over the weeks and months your issue set gradually clean up. So summary, an objective severity, the priority order, and of course description and a few other things. There's a number of other fields, but those aren't as key as the ones I've just shown you there. But the main takeaway is that the change request is a sort of basic unit of exchange between engineers and team leads and requirements authors and test engineers. And this is how we like to communicate to each other within the team. It puts email kind of aside, and as we go through the presentation, you'll see how I kind of de-emphasize it, de-emphasize email. Now, what we like to do is, instead of having issues arise and then the email come off from the JIRA server, which it does, but the emails that I receive, I have them all going off into a folder at the moment. And we're on version 4.3. Instead, what I like to do is let them pile up. Literally let the issues pile up hour over hour, day over day. Now, of course, if it's a critical and it's a blocker, the people will then walk it around or send the email or make the phone call. But those are actually kind of rare, at least in our organization. The fact that the issue or something someone's changed just brings the system to its knees completely. So instead, what we do is we let the issues systematically pile up. The idea is that the software developers and the test engineers, they've got their focus that we're trying to maintain. We're trying to keep that long train of thought moving quickly between station to station. So what we do is they're meant to go into that CR form, quickly disposition the issue, sort out what the problem is, express it in a rigorous form, and then toss it over their shoulder, and it falls on the floor. Literally falls on the floor, so to speak, in JIRA, and we leave it alone. Typically, we will meet at a change control board level once every 2 days. And these meetings will occur at the same time on Tuesdays and Thursdays on my project right now at 11:30 in the morning. And you know you just need to walk into the cave, essentially our room where we project the issues up on the wall. We'll get to that in a bit. But the people working and discovering these issues are essentially throwing them over their shoulder and letting them go on the floor. As we get ready for the change control board, someone who is watching this and refreshing it in their browser would see this list grow. And sometimes it would be growing at 50 defects discovered a day, depending on what rate things are happening. So it could grow quite quickly. Depends what phase we're in within development and integration. But the goal always is that the communication we want between our teams is compact and focused. Our team leads sit together. Their team members sit slightly elsewhere. Not the other side of the building, but like a hallway over or 2 hallways over. And who's their office mate? Not one of their team members. One of their co-team members on another team. So the idea there is that people, if they have a problem, helps kind of within the range, but they're also made to stand on their own feet, or their first reflex can't be just to go talk to their team lead. So the communication is compact and focused. To get the decision to be sticky, though, is that we essentially need a meeting agenda, which goes out ahead of time, that drives a quorum. The quorum is who's going to come. And this is really important, because if I had a standing meeting where I brought 20 people, because a lot of times there's roughly about 20 people in some roster, and I brought them to every meeting, only about every 5th meeting would someone necessarily have to know or be at that meeting. Not everyone has to be there all the time. So the goal is to get to a situation where you can publish what you're going to talk about at 11:30 on Tuesday, send it to people, and then allow people to assess that. And when they see something, some of the people you insist come to the meeting, and that changes from meeting to meeting, but my job is to make sure that roster is right. And others look in there and they say, well, this is important enough, I am going to come to this meeting, or at very least, I want to see what the outcome is afterwards. So what happens there is this is where I get into the mode of taking my JIRA filter, which I've used, in some cases, I've used the JQL for this. I've, in the past, not used the JQL, but with 4.3 personally started to use that, and I found that was very, very useful, being able to express what I wanted directly in the query language. And this is where I go and escape to Excel. So the question is, like, why would you want to go into Excel? At this point, essentially, I'm able to leap out of JIRA and get myself a grid. So what happens in this grid is I can now do some of the managerial things that I want, which is I can make that quorum focused on certain states. Essentially, I can use the auto filter to have very quick ad hoc filters that I throw away or I keep. But for me, the dashboard is part of the killer kind of tool set that JIRA offers. I really am fond of escaping to Excel. I can pivot table or any spreadsheet. I can pivot table, I can auto filter, I can then copy and paste these grids directly into emails. I can send those to people. People can annotate the grids, send it back to me. It's a very kind of efficient way of doing it. But fundamentally, what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that the verbal trumps the email. I mentioned earlier that the long email thread tends to break my heart. I mean, sometimes you're disparate. You just can't meet face-to-face because you're in different buildings or different places in the world. But when you can get together, I find people are better behaved when they're verbal, when they're talking to each other. You see a higher instance of, say, grammatical errors, which I always take as the perfectly formed, grammatically correct email just tells me someone has very carefully crafted their response and spent perhaps more time in the back and forth than if they'd simply just got together and had a freewheeling conversation. And this is where we're all heading, right? So far, we got ourselves a list of attendees that are building up. And now what we're going to do is have these meetings. We've allowed things to pile up. We've got our quorum. We have one place where we meet. We have a large wall, which we basically painted primer white. And we just project it floor to ceiling. And we go through issue. And our litmus test for whether we are getting through things fast enough is that for any of these issues, we should spend probably no more than a minute. It's a rule of thumb. Some things you take 5 minutes, other things take 10 seconds. But that's the quantity. If I've got a team that's generating thousands of issues in a month or in a business quarter, I've got to be going through these at this pace. So far, what have I done? I've used the JIRA dashboard. I've gone and built myself a list of issues. I've then gone and published a meeting invite, which allows us a quorum to see what that list of issues is ahead of time. I've assembled them in a room. We've started to make a decision making. And then we're at the point now where, as we go through the meeting, we're annotating directly into the meeting agenda. In this case, it's Outlook. That's what we use. And we're marking it up so that we can have something where we send out the same invite right after the meeting. I mean, it's very low tech. And people can see what the actual changes are. Of course, when the changes are actually made in JIRA, they would see email notifications. But it's like a one-stop shop that essentially shows you field by field a grid of what actually went on in that meeting. And it's interesting because I'll get people who said, I skipped your meeting because I didn't really think I cared about that issue. But now that I see the outcome, I have to want to see that issue brought up in the Thursday meeting. Key item is that the meetings are regular and they're ritualized. Not ritualized kind of like pagan, but ritualized so that if I'm the chair and I'm hit by a bus or my leg's broken, the meeting can just occur and everything in it is just like any other time that meeting runs. It is a very sort of strong precedence that we're following as we go and do this. It also means that if it's ritualized, the key thing that we're trying to avoid as well is that the roles people are playing at that meeting trump the personalities. I mentioned that I had some people who work for me. I got some big personalities who work for me. I also have people who don't work for me, but who I have to influence, I have to bring to these meetings, and I have to have them engage in decision-making that they're going to stick by. And some of them have very big personalities. So you need a system that, with or without me, can run week in and week out and keep draining the swamp. And the swamp's always filling. It's like doing the dishes. You know, you've done one meeting, and then there's 100 more things you got to deal with, or 30 more things you got to deal with at the next meeting. So the key there for me is that all the big personalities can have their say. They get their time heard. They've got good things to say, but we don't end up with the quiet person sitting in the corner of the room getting overwhelmed because their decision making is not being part of the process. The other thing that we're looking to do is we want to make sure that the outcomes are white boxed. I want to make sure that after we've had the meeting and we've gone and distributed the minutes and it's clear and it's all sitting in Outlook, that it's very easy for people to track the history of who said what when. You can go into the JIRA in 4.3 and you can look at the history of any given issue, but it doesn't always sort of illuminate you who said what, when, why did it happen this way. I mean, sure, you got the history, but one thing I like to do is if someone says, oh yeah, issue 12.5.16, that issue, what were you doing with it? Just using something like Outlook search allows me to go in and say, oh yeah, it was at this meeting, and we can see what the minutes are from that meeting. It was also at a previous meeting earlier on in the month. It showed up. I can see this issue starting to rattle around inside the change control mechanism, and the stickiness isn't being achieved. So we can focus in on that issue and start to understand why it won't just lay down and die or get into the right release. Or maybe it's not just some little bug, it's actually a larger problem that's something that's going to take multiple months to sort out. That is what I wanted to show you today. The key thing there is that we have a handful of tools. The tools are sort of agnostic. I come from a very waterfall software background, but I've also been in projects where there's a lot of agile, where there's full agile going on. But I'm very much like a pirate, so is my team. We look into the agile toolbox, we look into the waterfall toolbox, and we shamelessly steal the things that we want. So I've kind of stolen Outlook, stolen Excel, and I'm using JIRA at the core, essentially go in and make a change control process and having change control meetings. The people are willing to attend, and the fact that they're just 30 minutes long and people can get out at the end, and they know that the decisions that were made in that meeting, the chances that those decisions stick, and those are the same outcomes 2-3 weeks from now for those decisions, is a really motivating and energizing thing for the people who are working on the teams that we've got. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. And then there's also something, Ken, you were wanting to sort of mention the decompression chamber.
Yeah, so we got about 10 minutes, a little bit less,
okay,
for some Q&A, so we can definitely take questions here. If we run over, we will have Stuart pop into the decompression chamber, which is on your guys' map, but it's basically in the far corner over near the restrooms to the side of the sponsor pavilion. Yeah. So I saw a couple hands pop up. I'll do my best to try to give you guys a mic, so just bear with me.
Yeah, Stuart, is the primary decision that you're making in the change control meetings the priority decision? Meaning, where is this change control or CR going to fit on the priority stack, and maybe it falls completely off the stack? 1, and 2, is there any financial impact that you consider as well? In other words, we've got this CR. It's going to take 2 developers 3 weeks to fix, so it's a high financial impact. Maybe we need to delay it, past the next release, that type of thing.
Okay, well, let me break. Thank you. Did everyone hear that? Okay, so the key thing that I'm trying to sort out is the priority order, and that is ultimately informed by the financial envelope that I am in. And the biggest role that I play in these change control boards, a lot of times, is to sit quietly and listen and sort out when I have to say no, or more elegantly, it's not in this release, it's in the next release. Let's make sure our next proposal has that issue in it. So we're both using fixed version, where we map out all our upcoming releases, and we're using fixed version. So we'll say, this issue is not assigned, but we'll treat it as assessed. It's now downstream of being in the CCB's radar, but we'll know that it's tagged for the next financial envelope. And my role actually is largely the constraints of schedule and cost and making sure the team is properly balanced so that they don't get in a bind. And priority order is very important. Thanks. Doug, I think.
Any other questions over on this side?
No, I think there was a question right there. Yeah.
Stuart, is there anything that you've seen here at the summit so far that would change your process at all?
Oh, absolutely. So one thing that I saw is that we are underutilizing Confluence at our group. So I think people have come to Atlassian tools through different routes, and it sounds like Confluence has been one of the major routes. Our team came through it kind of through the JIRA route. So we do have a Confluence instance at our firm, but it's not really inside the big mothership of the back end. And so I think that's the Confluence and the ability. Now I think one thing I'll be interested to see is Confluence allows a lot of sort of collaboration and so forth. It's getting more and more dynamic. I think that's very cool. We'll see how we kind of wed that with the you find the problem, you toss the problem on the floor, you stay on target kind of model that we also like to operate within. This Confluence is what I want to add.
Anything else? Anybody else? All right, in the back.
Okay.
Bear with me.
Yeah, I was just curious about the difference between priority group and priority order and priority. JIRA comes built in with priority.
I'm going to come just a little closer. I'm sorry, there's a... Again?
Okay. Sorry, I'm
Okay.
trying not to get feedback.
You bet.
The question had to do with the difference between priority and priority order.
Yeah.
And I think the gentleman made the comment that JIRA already has priority, so how come you guys set it up the way you did?
Oh, okay. So what we did is we wanted a priority order that we could kind of hijack completely for our own purposes. And so I mentioned a little bit how in the summary description, we'll kind of tiptoe into new fields that we want to have gradually by having certain naming conventions. And if we like it enough, then we'll pop out into a separate field. The priority is kind of major, trivial, and so forth. We use that. We found that in the JIRA form, at least in the 4.3 that we were using, we couldn't get rid of it. It seemed like it was really big, at least that's what the backhand, maybe we were wrong, but it seemed like we were kind of stuck with that as one of the sort of core atomic pieces of a JIRA issue that we couldn't mess with. And so we elected, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we elected to add in priority order and then have that completely under our control. And that was our thought process. I don't know what's like in JIRA 5.
Yeah, I do believe that the priority field is automatically on every field configuration.
Okay. What we wanted to do was to, the fact that we exploded it out into 12 different priority steps, which is really just a numeric and they sort, gave us the granularity that allowed us, for instance, when we were dealing with the financial decisions, to say, we're heading into this release, we're going to get everything that's priority order number 1 through 8, and then everything below that, I don't think we have money for. Let's get ready to express that to the customer at our test readiness review, for instance. Okay, thanks.
Piggybacking on that, so would it be fair to say then that you're using severity and priority during the assessment phase, and the priority order is more of an assignment tool after you've decided upon a particular release iteration?
Absolutely, absolutely. So severity is what it is. There's really so little discussion or argument because it's laid out in a very black and white type manner, and that's the goal. And then the priority order is the thing that is flexible. Usually what happens is we find that after a bit of back and forth, things will sort of fall into the train. You know, the metaphor is the train of thought or the train of problems you're going to work through. And then it's the cut line about which release they're going to end up in. So most of the discussion, most of the heat and the energy at the change control board is about whether the issue is even valid, is a mistake, or whether it's got the right priority order. I couldn't hear some parts.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
So I think, like you said, the severity is cut and dry, but it may be horrible, but seldom happens. And those things tend to stick once it's been assessed. But it sounds like your priority order may be a little more dynamic as you come up to a release.
Yep.
You've got some 1s, 2s, and 3s that are in the release and some 4s that might be, and then the next release, those are all going to slide up and reevaluate and get reset then.
Yep.
But the severity and priority may not overall.
That's
Other
right.
fields.
Certainly the severity is pretty much static, and then once it's being determined, it could be a 3-year-old issue, and you look at the severity, you look at the severity guidelines, and you're like, yeah, it's that severity. We just never gave it a high enough priority to get it into a release, for instance.
The cost versus expense didn't pay off. Okay.
Probably got time for one more. Anyone else? All right. If you guys think of more questions for Stuart at any point, add a comment to the mobile app on the bottom of the page for this particular session, and he'll get an email notification, and then he'll reply to you. And you guys can do that for any track or any session that you see. And also keep in mind that the presentation and the video will be on the website, the Summit archives, within the next week or so. So you can share it with your colleagues, and you can also see other presentations that you may have missed. So with that, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.